Joanne Getz Oberlander. I was born August 29th, 1926 in Morton. Now it is North 3rd, but at that time it was Church Street.
Got it. And you were born at home?
At home, yeah.
Was that common practice?
Very, yeah.
Okay. Do you have brothers and sisters?
One sister.
Okay.
I had another one, but she only lived 3 days.
Did she? Okay. And is your sister in Morton as well? Does your sister live in Morton?
Oh,
as well?
she was, but I mean, she died now about 3 years ago.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My name is Les Freidinger. I was born October the 4th, 1930, at home here in Morton, on North Main Street here in Morton. And what else?
Where were you were born at home? Do you have brothers and sisters as well? Did you have family?
Yeah, I was born at home, and I had 2 sisters. I was the oldest in the family. And my friend here announced in school about my baby sister. I didn't even know if it was a boy or a girl yet, because I didn't realize my mother was pregnant.
You didn't know anything.
No. I woke up in the morning, this morning, March the 3rd, 1939, and there was a lady in the house. I didn't even know, but Dad had made arrangements for Martha Zare to come and babysit while he took my mother to the hospital. But a baby sister was born in the hospital. She was the only one born in the hospital, St. Francis Hospital. And what else?
That's a good start. We'll start there.
Okay.
My name's Bob Howder. I was born in Morton, in my home, in 1930. And lived there for 9 years, and then we moved, but that was the place. And I was born right across from what is now and was then the Township Building, corner of Jefferson and I guess it was called Lincoln then, but now it's got another name. But just a block from Interlocking.
My name's Tom Clark. I was born in La Crosse, Wisconsin in 1936 in a hospital. And I didn't come to Morton until 1970.
What brought you to Morton?
Well, I was recruited to the Forming Medical School in Peoria, and Morton, they told me, was the best place in the area to live.
You said you left for a little bit. Why did you leave, and where did you go?
Well, I went away to college with Illinois State Normal because it changed its name now to ISU. But I went there, and then I went to the service for a few years and lived in Normal for a while, and then back to Morton because, as Tom was told, it was the best place to live in the area.
And where did you go in the service? What did you do in the service?
I trained in Camp Gordon, Georgia, and then spent a year and a half, a little more, in Japan. It was after the war, but the Korean War was still going on. So after a 15-day boat ride, I thought I was going to Korea, and at the last minute stayed in Japan.
Did any of the rest of you have any experience with the military or the war?
Yes, Bob and I are about a month apart in age, and I was drafted in September of 1951, and I went to Camp Chaffee, Arkansas for basic training and cook school. And when I got out of cook school, my orders came through to go to Germany, in Army of Occupation in Germany. And I was over there from 51 until 53. I married a girl from Germany, but I didn't meet her when I was in the Army over there. I went back 9 years later to visit a family who took me in like one of theirs. They had cousins here in Morton, the Shook family, and I went back to visit them, and that's when I met my wife. And
Moved her back to Morton, or moved her to Morton?
yes, she moved to Morton. Never been to the USA before, and I told her this was God's country here.
Did she agree?
No, not the first summer anyway. First of all, she got pregnant right away.
Well, that wasn't. Yeah.
And then she said I never told her about the high humidity and the mosquitoes that we have here in Illinois. So, but she really loved it here in Morton.
She came around.
Came around, yeah. She just passed away.
Yeah, I was drafted into the Navy in 1954 and became a Navy corpsman and served in Florida and got out 2 years later and went back into the military as a civilian to Vietnam in '68.
My family, German heritage, Alsace-Lorraine, and Swiss, those two probably, and the whole community here at one time was very German oriented, overloaded really, because there were a lot of German. And the church I went to even had German services in addition to English services. And most of us could trace ourselves back to that area at that time when it was a smaller village.
Do you know how, really quickly, how did your family find Morton from Germany?
Well, one side, my mother's side, they kind of worked themselves west, stopped in Ohio, and then came here, and some of them went to Kansas, kind of split up. On my dad's side, I think they just came pretty much directly here, and we're one of the founding families in town.
And did they come here because they knew other people here?
I would imagine that birds of a feather flock together, and they all went to the same church, that kind of thing.
My family was, it's kind of hard to say. I'm not really sure. My mom, her mother and father were both from Switzerland. And my dad, he always said, Mom was a full-blooded Swiss, but he's just a mongrel. Because one grandmother was born up in Canada, in this French area. Another one was born in a log cabin in Iowa. And then, I don't know how they got together, but anyway, they're from different places. Now on me, mother spelled my name Joan, which everybody knows is Joan. Well, there weren't any Joannes in those times, and so she just named me Joan, which has always been problems. In the 5th grade, I was okay until the 5th grade. I was Joanne. And then
Miss Mushel.
Mrs. Mushel said, I've never had a Joan. Could I call you Joan? Oh, I should have said no, but I didn't. And it has been problems ever since. In high school, I had 2 teachers calling me Joanne, and the other 2, Joan. And the kids would stop me in the hall, what is your name? So I had a lot of problems with that, and I'm still having problems. So I just answer to both. But I worked for my dad after high school. I graduated in 1944, which was right during the war. So we didn't get anything extra. We didn't get to go, places well. Didn't have gas to go to the games. So if you were a cheerleader, they got to go with the boys, but not the rest of us. So I don't really have that many happy memories of fun in school. To me, it was just work.
What was your family's shop? Where did you work?
I worked for my father that had Morton Dry Cleaners, and they had to put it in an alley behind Main Street in case of explosion and fire. And my dad was very, very careful, I don't think. And they had to build a separate building on it. where all the cleaning things were.
Do you remember the address at the time?
No, we didn't have an address.
It's still there.
I think it's still there, but it's completely different.
Got an address now?
It's
decorations that you just left there, and now it's a shop.
some kind of baking. What isn't a bakery or something like that?
Bakery and
I think there are about 3 stores in there, but we just had the one end.
Okay. I'm trying to think where that's at.
You know where Heartland Bank? It's right behind that.
Oh.
You know where that's.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
I remember then exactly where that was.
Yeah.
Okay. Very cool.
And so I think it was about 1934 when my dad started. Nobody had any money. How they cleaned their own clothes. They dumped them in naphtha or whatever they were going to use. And so he would have to, when somebody would call in, he would have to walk from downtown to wherever it was. Well, of course, Morton was little, but still, if you have to walk after your clothes, it's going to take a while. And because my uncle and my dad were in the business together, and he took the truck. They did have a small truck, delivery truck, and he went to Manier and Washington, I think it was. I'm not really sure. It's too many years. And
Worked there until.
I worked there until he retired in 1966. He retired, and then I went to, it was Morton Federal Savings and Loan then. It's Heartland Bank now. And I was one of these strange people that didn't get married. In fact, I was 42 when I did. And so I have stepchildren. And they're all out in California.
Really?
Uh-huh.
Oh.
So.
Would the beach and sunny weather draw them out there?
Oh, they sure would like a little rain. They just can't get rain. They'll forecast it, but it doesn't happen. No, it's been very, very bad this year. Then I have 2 nephews, and that's my family.
That's your family?
I just don't have very many.
Nephews here in Morton?
No, one's in Colorado and one's in Tennessee. So I don't get to see them very much, but I talk to them a lot.
Did you ever travel outside of the community or live outside of the community?
No, but my husband and I went to California to see the boys. There were 3.
Mother was originally from Peoria, but my father's family, my grandfather was born in Alsace-Lorraine in France and Germany. It went back and forth. And then Grandpa moved here to Cissna Park, Illinois, and they lived in Cissna Park, and he met his wife. His wife was from Forest, Illinois, my grandma Freidinger, and they married, and then they moved to Morton in 1912. And then in 1912, 12 was when the Apostolic Church burned down, right? About 6 months after my family moved to Morton, and Grandma and Grandpa took in. They lived
This isn't a confession, is it?
Pardon?
This isn't a confession. Is
No, but they did take. They lived real close to the church, and they took in room and boarders, because construction workers that built the new church in 1913. And what else did you?
What did you do?
What I do?
Yeah.
Well,
Professionally.
my dad and Uncle Ben had a grocery store and meat market here in Morton, and I started working at the store when I was old enough to walk, nearly.
Tell her where it was.
It was on South Main Street, right across from Miller Bakery. It's where the Basta is at now, and they started their business up in the old Ben Franklin store up at the corner of Main and Jefferson, but then they were renting the room there for the meat market and store. But then there was a bank that started up down on South Main, about a block away from them, that started in the 20s, and it was a bad time for a bank to start, needless to say, and they had to close. So the building was empty for several years, and my dad and my dad did more of the financing. Uncle Ben convinced him to go talk to Mr. Ruling at the bank about buying the building or renting it or whatever. But Mr. Ruling was more interested in selling the building. That would eliminate any possible competition. So they moved down there on South Main, and they actually started the Ben Franklin store in 1925, and they were down, and they closed the store on August the 28th, 1965. And August 29th, 65, my dad turned 65.
Tell about your competition in the grocery business, their competition.
Yeah.
Name the other stores.
It was, at that time, there was 7 grocery stores right down in the main block on Main Street.
Really?
Yeah. There was A&P, Kroger, and there was a Larkin store, and then my dad and uncle, they were all on one side of the street. On the west side of the street, on the east side of the street was Krug's Market, and my dad and George Krug were real good buddies, and I got my middle name from George Krug. He and my dad were real good, friendly competitors. And then there was Greeter's Market, and Mueller's, and Jansen's. So we had plenty of grocery stores, but they were all small stores. And by the way, my dad and uncle remodeled their store in 1938, and they extended the building back. It was a real small store, and they built back to the alley, and it was the first self-service store in Morton. They had shopping carts, and that was in 1938.
Did they deliver, and did people charge?
Oh yes.
Tell those stories.
Yes, they had free delivery, but you paid for it indirectly, I guess. Had to. And then they did have credit business. You charge, and some people would pay weekly, but pay when they could. But
That's right.
But yeah, many times people would send the children to the store, and my uncle had a trick. He was the butcher. My uncle Ben was the butcher, and he fascinated children. But he'd have like a hot dog crawl up his arm. But he and boy, they were all like. And Jack Herstein was taken by it, and he went home, was taking some hot dogs home, and his mother, he never came home. His mother found him sitting on a curb with his hot dog package open, trying to make him jump up his arm.
How did he do that?
He somehow got his fingers, and it
He moved up his arm.
yeah, well, he pushed it up, but it sure looked like it was crawling up by itself.
I missed something here.
You missed that, yeah.
Did anybody ever send people there, children there, just because they didn't have the money, and you give credit to the kid pretty
Yes.
quick, right?
Yes. We had one family that was very poor, and Dad and Uncle Ben trusted them so much that they charged, and the daughter would write down on the sales pad what they got. They trusted them to. And
Did you ever trade for goods, like for eggs?
Yes, farmers would bring eggs in, and they'd take the
Traded for other things?
Yeah, out in trade, right. Yeah, we had fresh country eggs.
Okay, Mr. Howder, tell me, what did your family do?
My mother was just a housewife and a mother for some years, and then during the war, the Second World War, she was a teacher, and she had been a teacher as a young lady with very little education. You only had to go. She came from Kansas. A bunch of sisters moved out here, and she moved out. She had very little formal education, but she had a great understanding of people, and she taught them. In those days, when you had a one-room schoolhouse, you taught as much about courtesy and kindness and getting along and behavior as you did in some of the subject areas, because it was necessary with 1 through 8 kids. And of course, they had to be the janitor, and they had coal stoves and that kind of stuff. She was a teacher. My dad had many jobs. He sold cars, he delivered milk, he worked at the interlocking, that kind of thing, and throughout life.
And how about you? How did you spend it?
I went away to college intending to be a teacher. After I graduated, I was drafted, and I was going to go back and get a master's degree in school administration, but got married when I got home. I had dated this girl for 6 years. College, we couldn't get married, couldn't afford it, and then 2 years of service. But then I think I caused it, but she got pregnant very quickly when I got home, and so we had no money, and so I didn't go to grad school, even though I had GI. I only went 1 semester and went to work at GE, who was new in Bloomington at the time and moved from Schenectady, and they gave me tests and said I could go into accounting, and I had no business being in accounting. But I survived for 4 years, and a guy that worked there got out, left, and was in sales, and he talked to somebody at a diner counter in Kansas, Illinois, and that night I got a call, and this former guy that I knew at GE was now a salesman, and he had met another salesman at the counter, and that guy was looking for somebody to sell school educational films. Well, I interviewed, and of course with a degree and everything, and young, and I got the job and stayed for 4 years, and then I sold school textbooks for the rest of my career and finally got my master's in school administration. So, yeah, 5 years of college to be a teacher and never taught. I would like to just say something about something Les would know. We had a train go up and down the tracks, the Interurban, and it went in front of what is now PNC Bank. And that was a station, and Mr. Orr, I forget some of the people.
Cecil Orson.
Orson, yeah, and another guy.
Winfield. Cecil was the son. The agent was Win
Orson?
Win Orson.
Okay, yeah. That's where the papers were delivered, and they came from Peoria, and they were dumped off there. They had a big cart. They'd carry them inside. There was benches all the way around the building. It's not there. That's the bank now. And the papers were delivered, and we'd all gathered there, all the guys that delivered, and we had a pot-bellied stove. And then we'd go out from there, and most of us it was always on a bike. And you had bags, and you had a basket, and winters were pretty tough doing that. And then I mowed yards. A lot of us mowed yards and that kind of thing. I worked at Witzig's. I worked at Cook Dairy Store. I worked at Interlocking. I worked at Witzig's. I worked different jobs. Finally, at the canning factory I worked, and that's where I met my wife. And I saw her and fell in love pretty fast, and followed up, and we've been married, 64 years.
I was born in Morton, Illinois, 2/16/31. What was the third?
Where were you born?
In Morton.
At your home or a hospital?
At the old farmhouse out on Route 98. In fact, that's now Killer Corner. It was Killer Corner. Now it's a safe intersection. But the interesting thing about that is we lived in Morton for the first 8 years of my life. My dad was a bricklayer for Sam J. Getz, his cousin in Morton, until my grandpa Strunk on the farm retired, and we moved to the farm when I was an 8th grader, and lived on the farm the rest of our life, really. But it's kind of an interesting story. I guess the time of that occurrence was kind of unique in that there are not too many people who lived in Morton or around Morton. So I had 4 uncles, Strunk uncles, marry 4 Wick sisters, and they lived on 4 consecutive farms on Route 98 in Morton. And of course, when I moved in there, I was the first Getz in the Strunk family. But the Strunk family is still prominent in this community. They all farmed, of course, on Route 98. Joe Strunk had one son, Gilbert. Next place west was John Strunk. And he had, I can't tell you how many daughters and sons he had, quite a few. And just before that, I went out of line. I was in next on the Route 98. My grandpa married Emma Strunk. And he had 2 children, my mom and her sister, and she died 2 years earlier of some kind of disease. I don't recall what it was. But we farmed there most of our career until Route 98 took the Killer Corner out, put in an intersection there, 98 and 121, 155 now. I farmed with Dad. We milked cows till I graduated from high school. Went to U of I in ag school, thinking I'd come back to farm in the dairy. Well, after I got through college, that was 1953. I got married, and I also went to the battlefield in the Korean War. I didn't have to go into the fighting area, which I was very grateful for, because I was in a recon company. And the recon company is one that's out in front of the division, trying to find where the enemy is and how you're going to attack them. Most first lieutenants in recon companies never made it back. Thank the Lord for that. I went to U of I then to finish my 4-year degree, and came back to the farm. My dad and mom moved to town, and I moved on the farm with my wife and 2 kids.
You sold seed corn, didn't you?
Yes, I was fortunate. We didn't have a big farm. We had a very small farm, so we had trouble making a living on that farm. And Henry Carius, a Pioneer, knew our family very well. He knew how my education was, and he recommended to Pioneer that they hire me as a sales rep for the company, so I could continue farming and take the sales rep job to augment our income. And it made my day. We also raised seed corn for Pioneer, and that was very lucrative. On a small acreage, you could get income off of a seed field considerably better than field corn or soybeans. Anything you can think of?
Where is your family from? Where does your family originate from?
I'm not positive, but I think my grandma came from Switzerland and my grandpa from Germany. But I don't. You better not put that in the account. Okay.
Do any of you remember? Well, we talked a little bit about this, but do you remember why they left Germany?
Particularly income and religious differences. They had their own religion. They came out here with the Apostolic Christian Church, most of them, and Mennonites, and they came there primarily for the religious freedom was offered over here.
And how did they find Morton? Do you know?
Other relatives that were here, I'm sure. I don't remember exactly the consequences or when that happened, but it was an amazing situation. I've got 2 sons. One's a pastor in Port Wayne. The other one's in actuary work with Great Central Insurance Company. He's in Morton. Greg's in. I've got grandchildren all over the world. I've got a pastor's grandson in Berlin, Wisconsin. It's called Berlin up there. It's no longer Berlin. I've got a grandson and his wife. He met over here, and they moved to Australia, Tanzania, really. I've got a grandson in Indiana. Can't say. My memory's about shot. He's in a factory that produces a lot of equipment for mobile homes.
Born July 31, 1938. Lived in, my parents lived in Roanoke. Sorry, I'm not ready for this. Sorry. And my mother was from Milford, Indiana, and my dad was from Roanoke. He was a automobile dealer in Roanoke. This is before I was born. don't think I was even thought of. And so my mother was, as I said, from Indiana, come from a family of 14, 9 sisters and 5 boys. And as I said, my dad was he was sold Studebakers, believe it or not, in Roanoke, Illinois, back when he was just a young guy. And him and my mom got married, and as she progressed along through this marriage, or through the paternity, she looked at my dad, and they told me this later. I didn't know it. I didn't know anything about her. They made a lot of decisions without telling me, and I was still inside. Ladies laugh at that. They laugh. Nobody else remembers it. I didn't either. And she says, yeah, she says to my dad, now here we are. We got this baby coming up, and there's no hospital in Roanoke. What are we going to do? So somebody said, well, there's a little one in Eureka. So she said, okay, let's go. They put her in a car, drove over to Eureka, had me in the thing. I don't remember any of that stuff. But they worked out fine, so I still get the blame for it today that I'm from Roanoke, and born in Eureka.
How did you find your way to Morton?
Barely. Huh?
Lived up there.
Yeah, sorry. Recently, you mean? Okay, this is my second trip to Morton for living. My wife and I moved to Morton years and years ago. We bought a house from Schrock Realty. They had built some houses in Morton on Madison Street, and the guy that was building it was Joe Schrock, and he was his wife is a sister to my mother, one of those 14. And so that's how we went, and so we had 3 kids here in Morton. We had 3 kids, okay. And so they went to school here and did well, loved it, had good neighbors. Just everything was just great. I think Lincoln School, if I'm not mistaken. But lots of things happen when you got kids in school. And I'm working in the furniture business. Back then, in the retail business, you had to work usually about 12-hour days. We'd start about 8:30 in the morning and work till 8:30 at night. 6 days a week. Stolen over. Wow, you got a good memory. Thanks for coming.
He didn't work there, you did. You worked out at the field shop.
Yeah, I did.
I don't even remember that. I've been here all my life.
Yeah. Well, I would ride my bike instead of driving a car from Madison Street out to the Field Shopping Center. And who owned that shopping center anyway? Zobers. There you go. Yeah. So, but a lot of stories right there with that bunch of people. We had a good time.
And you had a store in East Peoria then?
Yeah.
Years.
Yeah, that started in 1950. My dad started that in 1950. Time went on. He got older. Well, we all got older. As my dad got older, he started to retire, and then he dumped a lot of that responsibility on me. And then I had, let's see, I've got a brother and two sisters.
When did you come back to Morton?
Oh boy, that's just only been a couple months ago.
Only a couple
In a retirement center here.
Moved into here.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
PNC Bank is right now. When I was in the 4th grade, I got in line with the publisher to get a paper route in Morton. And at that time, kids and families took it from one generation to the next. You couldn't get a paper route in no way. Now you can't find anybody that will deliver the papers. And I delivered the Pekin Times on the west side of Morton, had bicycle as well. I got 3 cents a week if I collected. If they paid yearly, I got 2 cents a week per paper. So I made 50 cents and fight the snow all winter. But it was a wonderful experience. And I appreciate the opportunity, and everybody else that had jobs there. Many of my relatives also had paper routes. You left school at 3:30 and went down to the depot, wait for your papers to come in. You started delivering and get home for supper.
Well, another thing about delivering papers, in those days, a lot of people really didn't have the money.
Oh, yeah.
And now you mail in or you put on a credit card to pay, but we collected every week with a ring with cards on it. And I often would knock on the door, and I could hear them inside, but they wouldn't come to the door. And the reason being, you just had to understand that they had no money this week. And so in fact, I was carrying them on my money, in effect, but that's just the way it was. And you had to be, that was almost as hard as delivering the papers.
Yes, it was.
So we didn't make much money, but I marched right now with my little amount to Ruling's Bank and Morton Bank, and Chris Getz and Hodgins and some of the others would take it, and it might only be a few bucks, but it was good savings. You ask why Morton is a good town. The Apostolic Christian Church was predominant in this town. And when you go back to some of the names, I'm related to many of them, the Cariuses, the Witzigs, you named that, the Rapps, some of the families. I'm related to all of them. And they all went to the Apostolic Christian Church, and you asked Ken why they came here. A lot of it was religion. Why did they settle in Morton? Because their churches weren't everywhere. So they came to be together. They made this town, and we were ridiculed at times because there was a writer in the Peoria Journal, especially, he would see people washing out their garbage cans or see people cleaning the gutter with their own broom and that was very common. The homes were generally clean, the town was clean, people went to church. They were interrelated because the church at the time pretty much married within the church, and so we were all kind of interrelated. We had many cousins, many uncles, many aunts, grandmas, grandpas, and in my family, I had so many cousins in school at the same time. I was under pressure, not pressure exactly, but to behave, because my cousins behaved, and my aunts and uncles all knew everything about us, right? And you just wanted to be a good kid. And I think the church, the German work ethic, at one time we had the moniker or the name of City of Beautiful Homes. We had a lot of contractors, bricklayers, carpenters. They were craftsmen. And we had more brick homes than any town around. And they were built well, and they were built, some of them with a handshake. And you could trust the contractor, and you could trust the electrician, that kind of thing. So it was a solid family community with heritage of a strong church. And I think that was a big factor in this community.
You mentioned about why do you like Morton. I mentioned primarily great people. And I've enjoyed the last 7-8 years. The community had a program at the Bertha Frank Center. Last week we had Monday a great program. And I happened to see Phil Cool over at the door helping. I said, I'm going to go over and talk to Phil Cool. And I went over to Phil and I said, Phil, he's a big contributor, $2,500 a year to put that program on. There was 4 other, the community bank, can't remember the other three, but groups that contributed of their income to provide. We could get in for $15 a program, $450 and because of people like that who are generous, it provided a lot of good entertainment for a lot of people in Morton. In fact, the place was full, sold out last week. And I just happened to see Phil over at the entrance door taking tickets, and he's on the board. And I went over to him and I said, Phil, I want you to know how much we appreciate it.
How much you appreciate it, right?
People like you. And he said, Ken, it's a privilege. Village of Morton is a wonderful people.
Tell them about the band concerts.
I'm Les Freidinger again. Band concerts, I wasn't much for music, really. So.
No, but we had a lot of things like
Oh
that.
yeah, we had band outdoors in the summertime, and
Picnics, that kind of thing.
and we had the fall festival. I remember one year it was always on Saturday, a big deal on Saturday, and I was working at my dad's and uncle's store, and I heard they were going to have a race. The boys racing, and so I slipped out. I didn't even tell my dad where I went. I slipped out and got in a 50-yard dash, and I won it. I got 50 cents for winning it.
You were a professional.
Oh, was I ever? Yeah, I never thought of that. And I worked all day for $5. So I made for a half hour. So I made pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, they paid me well too. $5 back in those days was a lot of money.
I love music. I've sung since I was just a kid, and I love it. And God has been very, very good for me because I'm 92 and I can still sing. Not like it used to be, but anyway, it still makes music. There was this man, every year he would sing, and he just really had a great voice. And he would always sing. And I don't remember just exactly why he quit. I don't know if he moved away or what. And they asked me to sing. So one season I sang, and I loved it. And
Tell them where it was.
it was in the end of the school, Jefferson School.
The school. The only school at that time.
Yeah, at that time was the only school. Yeah.
You just made me remember, Joanne, that Thursday nights right now we have band concerts in the park, but when I first moved here they had a band concert every Wednesday night in the park, and it was always the same band. It was the Morton Municipal Band. Yeah. And it was directed by Gretchen's husband who lived here.
Oh, Youngst.
Rudy Youngst. Rudy Youngst. Rudy Youngst, and it was in the park, right across from where I lived at the time on Parkside, was the Wednesday night municipal band, and Phil Cool played the tuba in that band. When I came here, Morton had not many doctors, but they had good doctors. They were all in family practice. There was Dr. Aronoff and Dr. Moran and Dr. Triffanoff, and there was one lady doctor, Dr. Hodel. And the day that I came was the day that Dr. Hodel quit, and as many patients that she could, she thankfully directed to me with a little letter about each patient. And so I expected the letter to say a medical history of that person, but more likely it said that person was a farmer's wife and they had 2 sheep and 4 cows and yeah. So I opened up an office in the Field Shopping Center renting from Tater Zobrist, and because I started out only 2 days a week, he only charged me $65 a month, which included utilities. It did not include a bathroom, unfortunately. So I'm sure I was the only doctor in town with no bathroom. And I stayed there until the practice got larger, and then I had to move, and I moved in to Dr. Jim Davis's building across from the high school. And he charged me a lot more.
What floor were you on?
I was in the basement. Yeah.
Bathroom.
And we had 2 bathrooms, so that was a big improvement. And then from there, Morton was a great place to practice medicine, but we didn't have any services. We didn't have a lab. We didn't have the Jefferson Street Clinic. Oh, I forgot to mention them. They were there when I came to town, and Dr. Patton and his son, and they were a great benefit for Morton. Everybody loved them, as they should, because they were great, but they didn't provide services either. They had an X-ray facility, but it was very small, and they had to shut it down. And so if we wanted to send a patient for like a chest X-ray, we sent them to Tremont to the health department. Yeah.
What years were they?
And that was in the 70s. And then they would have to carry the X-ray back to town, and then we'd have to get it back to Tremont, and it efficiency-wise it wasn't ideal. There was a mortician in town at that time named Bob Perry, and Bob Perry was putting together a community committee to try to bring services to Morton. In fact, what Bob Perry wanted was to develop a small hospital in Morton. That wasn't going to happen because at that time you had to have a hospital that met certain standards to be able to admit a Medicare patient, and if you didn't meet those standards, you couldn't admit a Medicare patient, and if you couldn't admit a Medicare patient, you couldn't have a hospital. So that initiated the development of the Morton Medical Center, which I had a major role in, and that developed with space to have subspecialties come in, to have a first-class X-ray facility, to have an in-facility laboratory, and a pharmacist. Pharmacist was run by Al Victor. The lab was run by myself and one other person. We had 3 lab technicians full-time, so it was a big lab. We did about 80 to 100 lab tests each day. We did lab for all the area doctors as well as the doctors in the facility. We did the lab work for all the area veterinarians. Turned out there's a lot of unhealthy cows, dogs, and horses. But so about a year after we opened, there were 23 doctors in that facility.
Where is that facility?
1400 South 4th, which is, I mean, you could throw a rock at it from here.
Does it still function in the same capacity?
No, it doesn't. The hospitals developed their own facilities in town, both Methodist and St. Francis and Proctor. So we went from limited facilities to a plethora of facilities. There was an effort by some to develop a single good large facility that would be owned by all of the hospitals jointly. and that would have been able to provide lots of services that we still don't have, like MRI. And well, I came here initially because of the university, and I was on the faculty for 25 years until I retired. But being on the faculty didn't prohibit me from having a private practice. In fact, it required that I have a practice to be on the faculty. But actually, my personal life was my practice, my medical school involvement, but a big part of that was my staff involvement on the hospital. I was involved during a time of transition.
Okay.
When I started, all the doctors in town made house calls. By the time I retired, nobody made house calls. Patients would tell you that they were happy to be here in the good old days. And doctors would tell you that too, but the transition involved more corporate medicine, more hospital-owned practices, and things that probably depersonalized the practice of medicine, unfortunately. But on the other hand, it was a time of great progress in drugs available, even though they're expensive, in the type of surgery that's done now, and in the efficiency of medicine. It's much more efficient than it was.
We were in high school
Yeah.
during the war, and we didn't mention that much, but gas was rationed, tires were almost unavailable, and you stayed pretty much close to home. Sugar was rationed, you saved foil, you saved all kinds of products. In fact, I got a letter when I was a freshman in high school, and I was so proud of it. I got a track letter as a freshman, and I couldn't get everybody had letter sweaters in those days. You've seen the Hop, where they had all the letters. That was a pretty big deal. They had none. Finally found one down at Champaign, but that was one of the missing items that we didn't have, and we would save toothpaste tubes, right? We peeled foil off of things, right? And saved string. We even saved string. I don't know.
And you would attribute that to the war?
Oh,
Because
yes.
of the rations from
Oh,
the
yes.
war?
The war was a defining part of our life, I would say, because, there were three events in my life. I would say the hard times in the 30s, the Depression. My wife's dad rode the rails to different towns to try to get work. That made us more frugal as a generation, more careful with our money, maybe better in the stock market because we knew when to be careful. And then I think the war had a big effect. It was unlike wars now. Everybody was involved. Every moment of every day you were part of the war. Because so many people were gone, so many people were dying. They were gone so long, 4, 5, 6 years, some of them. And it was just different times, right? And then after the war, the United States was preeminent as never before, industry. Everybody else was beat up, physically beat up, their country, and we weren't. And we were geared up. So business was good, jobs were available, times were good. GIs came home, got college degrees, and from then on, it was gangbusters, wasn't it, really? That was, America really came alive in that war, and it was everybody for everybody else, and we knew that, and it's not that way today, for various reasons. But most of us would say we think we lived in the best of times, and I think most of us worry about the future.
Primarily the radio.
Radio? Yeah. Okay.
No.
That's your one.
Yeah, sorry.
We would go to the theater, and they'd have Paramount News, I think it was,
Yeah.
at the theater. And we'd,
forgot about that.
yeah.
Same
And that's-
voice, always
Yeah, and
great.
Now you see it on TV 5 minutes after it happens, and we'd see it maybe 5 weeks after it happened or whatever. But
There were newscasts.
Newscasts.
And the movies, and the radio, we were all tuned to the radio.
we had shorts, short features at the movie. We had the Three Stooges. They were, remember the Three Stooges, Tom?
Oh, yeah.
It was a comedy. And the Bowery Boys, Dead End Gang, but they'd have news in the Tom Mix, yeah. And
Well, you could afford the movie.
yeah.
I mean, it wasn't too expensive. So.
No, about 10 cents, as I remember, yeah.
If you went in the afternoon.
Yeah, you couldn't go at night.
One thing I want to mention too, I'm not bragging about this, but I was the secretary at the Morton Chamber of Commerce years ago, and Henry Rapp was our president at the time. And we was on the board when they brought up the proposal of having a park district here in Morton. We never had a swimming pool in Morton. If we wanted to go swimming, we'd have to go to Pekin or whatever, a creek. and Henry Rapp came up with the promotion of forming a park district here in Morton. And I can't tell exactly what year it was, but it was back in the 60s, I think it was. Well, anyway, it was brought up to a vote for the people to vote if we wanted to have a park, because we had no parks as such in Morton, and it was voted down to have a park district. But Henry didn't give up. He did a lot of more work on it, and the following year we had another vote, and it passed, which was one of the best things that happened to Morton, because with the parks we have and the swimming pool and whatever.
Tell what Henry did as a business.
Henry worked at his family was the founders of the Morton Pottery, but he was a real community-minded man, good man, Henry Rapp Jr. But he was a real pioneer in Morton. That's where many people worked in Morton. That was long before Caterpillar.
And that pottery was located where?
On Jefferson Street.
The library.
Right where the library is located now is where the Morton Pottery was. We had a pool hall. Pool hall.
Tell what the coach thought of the pool hall.
Yeah, he didn't want us to go in the pool hall. Yeah, that was where the kids would hang out.
Where we were supposed to get our haircuts. Tell about that.
Boy, we had to get our haircuts, real short haircuts, wear stocking caps in the wintertime.
And he told us where to get the haircuts.
Did he?
Oh, yeah. Slip
and Cookie, yeah.
Yeah.
Slip. We had a barber, his nickname was Slip. Slip Daniels.
Really?
Yeah. And his partner was Cookie, Gerald Cook. Cookie and Daniels.
And they talked basketball, and he didn't want us to go in there.
Yeah.
Didn't they say we shouldn't get our haircuts there?
Yeah. You don't remember that?
I got my hair cut there.
Where does these come from? Oh, sorry.
Well, I was just going to say I got my hair cut at the office.
At the office,
Yeah. Well, the interesting part, he was talking about those two guys. Cook was a good basketball player out of Danvers, Illinois, right? Mm-hmm. And they talked sports all the time, and everybody knew everybody. And we had one coach coached most of the sports in high school. And the discussions at the barber shop were questionnaires. When you sat in the chair while you were a captive, they would ask you questions about the team and the coach. So he finally got fed up with it, the coach did, and prohibited us from going to that barber shop. But we went anywhere. Isn't that right, Ken?
No, I didn't. I went down across the street.
Yeah. Well, that
remember
was
his
Slip
name.
and Cookie. We weren't supposed to go there.
No.
Oh, Bob Reel.
Bob Reel.
Bob
Bob
Reel.
Reel.
Yeah.
Good guy.
You got anything, Ken?
No, I don't think so.
We were one grade ahead of this guy.
Yeah, they were seniors. I was a junior.
The school was so small then, if you went out for the team, you got a suit.
Tell who our teachers were in grade school. This is interesting.
our
See,
first-
one school, Jefferson,
Yep.
one grade, and this is a long time ago. And I'll bet we all can. I know. You went to grade school.
Yeah.
Our first grade teacher was Letty Brown.
The school.
Second grade teacher was Carolyn Strunk.
Okay.
Eliza Ackerman was our 3rd grade teacher.
She was
Laura
principal.
Poppenhaus was our 4th grade teacher. And Anna Muschel was our 5th grade teacher. And she was real strict. In fact, she was teaching 5th grade when my dad moved to Morton from Cissna Park, and she held him back a year because he was
Slipping, huh?
well, they were behind up there,
Oh,
it says behind, and he held her back. She held him back.
Yeah.
And one thing she did for me, she could tell I was having trouble with arithmetic. And she asked me one day, she called me up to her desk if I would mind to stay after school, not as a punishment, but for her to help me with my arithmetic. And I said, sure, so I did. And boy, we spent about a couple weeks there after school, and after that, arithmetic was a snap for me until I got to geometry. that was the end of my math career.
Then who was 6th grade?
6th grade was Fern Smith, 7th grade was Ethel Brown, and 8th grade was Ward Grundy. Grundy School, Ward Grundy was
Four
our,
schools named after faculty.
yeah, Grundy School, and Letty Brown.
Interesting thing was, he didn't say it quite right because it was miss, until all the way through 7th grade.
Yeah.
Not one married teacher.
Oh.
Ward Grundy was our first married
And so
teacher.
their whole life was the school and getting us through.
Oh my goodness.
Miss.
The Letty Brown, she was a jewel. When very first day of school, she went to her closet. She got this thick paddle, and she said, "Any one of you who caused me to use this, I will." She put it in the closet, closed the door, it was never opened. Never opened.
Got the message.
But she was so strict. She did not teach us. Was she mean to you? I was scared of her, I know.
I got the message too.
Real mean if you went to pants.
She did not teach us how to print. She taught us cursive from the very beginning. And she would have a list of about 10, was it about 10? About 10 words on the board. So we had to study them. Okay, what happens? When she figured we should know them, we had to stand up by our seat, turn our backs to the wall, tell her what those words were, and spell them. First graders,
I didn't never got
I was a nervous wreck. So she told my mom, she learned that I would I was just so nervous that she did me first. Called on me first. I remember that.
Who else had a paddle in that school?
Huh?
Who else had a paddle in that school? But it was used.
Mr. Grundy.
Oh, yeah, I can believe that.
Well,
He had
yes.
a paddling machine. I don't know if you ever.
Oh, well, I knew he was terrible. He was terrible with you kids in sports.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
He was strict.
nobody would have
We
stood.
lived it. You just heard about it.
Well,
Yes. Third grade.
Huh?
Third grade Ackerman.
Third grade?
Mm-hmm.
Was there more than one sister?
Yeah, there was
More than one
several-
Oh,
sister.
yeah, more said more than one teacher. Yes. Yeah.
When we lived on Madison Street, my dad planted 2 cherry trees in our backyard. And so as the cherry trees grew and matured out and all that, we had to pick them because we were the kids. But along comes a couple of these old ladies with a great big hat on, long skirts and all that. We didn't know who they were. But they said, well, they're Ackerman sisters. Then said to my wife, we want to go in the backyard there and pick some of them cherries. Okay. So I had to get the ladder out of the garage for them to crawl up the ladder. Well, it turned out to be every year. That come out. Ackerman, here comes the Ackerman girls. Dean, go get the ladder out of the garage. And they'd sit there for half a day. but they're wonderful people. We love to have them there. And I don't know what they did with them. I guess they took them home and canned them.
Sully Ackerman developed Hyde Park. Well, I've made this lots of times before. It's not made any difference, but I would like to see them develop another road out of Hyde Park. Right now, that's a pretty large community out there, and there's only one way to access and egress from it.
And there's a stub road.
And there is a stub road if they would ever choose to.
We looked at that when I was on the village board about 25 years ago, and we talked to Verna Getz.
That's right.
Talked to her trying to develop it.
Get that land.
Yeah.
Because if they can't get the land, they won't put the road.
She owned the land.
Yeah.
We said, put a road in there, you sell lots for good money. She was not interested. She
Who was
wanted to keep
Verna,
the farm.
where was Verna Getz?
Opera Day. Married Chris Getz.
Oh,
Bill Opera Day.
Yeah.
Not Bill.
Opera, yeah.
Esther.
And
Esther, yeah.
Married Chris, yeah.
Esther, that's right.
I think that Morton's on a pretty good path. Controlled growth, enough industry as long as the tax laws are like they are. Got a lot of tax support.
Zoning.
Zoning is watched pretty carefully. Great library. Keep their facilities up on a schedule. They're now getting into their reserves, which worries me. This is the first time really where they've running deficits and going into reserves. The park district is great. There's a lot. The school system's great. So
that's going to be the biggest problem for the community, I think, is the school system.
well,
Whether you get a new high school or you get
yeah, that's the big one right now. Yeah,
big money and big question.
and where it should be.
Yep.
They bought land, but I'm not sure
Yeah.
that's the right land.
And I
But
think they made a mistake at that point.
yeah, I do
Price
too.
wise and location wise.
Right, both. It's a fine combination of industry and living conditions type of thing. Yeah, as long as the tax laws are as they are now, that's a good combination. School system's great.
Want to have lunch with us?